The first warning Claire Bennett received at Hayes Estate was not about the storm, the locked gates, or the miles of dark woods surrounding the mansion. It was about a table. She arrived at 10:45 that night in a borrowed gray coat, with rain dripping from her hair and a hospital bill folded in the pocket of her jeans. The mansion stood at the end of a long private road outside Greenwich, Connecticut, all pale stone, tall windows, and iron lamps glowing through the rain like watchful eyes. Claire had cleaned offices after midnight, stocked grocery shelves before sunrise, and folded laundry until her hands ached. But she had never worked in a house that looked rich enough to have its own weather. The driver dropped her at the front steps and left before she could change her mind. She stared up at the double doors, took one breath, and reminded herself why she was there. Her father's hospital room cost more per night than she made in a week. The landlord had already given her one final extension. Pride did not pay medical bills, and sleep could wait. She lifted the brass knocker once. The door opened almost immediately. A thin older man in a black suit stood inside, straight-backed and serious, with silver hair and the tired patience of someone who had seen too many secrets pass through polished halls. "Miss Bennett?" he asked. "Yes, sir. I am Mr. Whitaker, the house steward." "You are early." Claire glanced at the rain behind her. "The bus was late, so I walked the last half-mile. I did not want to risk being later." Something in his expression softened, but only for a second. "Come in." Warmth touched her face as she stepped into the foyer. The ceiling rose 3 stories above her. A chandelier shimmered overhead, not bright, but golden, like trapped candlelight. Marble stretched under her worn black shoes. Oil portraits lined the staircase, though several had been turned toward the wall as if the family inside them had done something unforgivable. Claire noticed that. She noticed everything. Poor people learn to read rooms quickly, because one wrong move in a rich person's space could cost a job. Mr. Whitaker handed her a navy apron, a key card, and a typed list. "Your shift is from 11 at night until 5 in the morning. You will refresh the main rooms, dust the library, prepare the morning tea tray, and record anything unusual in the night log." Claire nodded. "Yes, sir. There are 3 rules specific to this house." His voice changed, not louder, but heavier. "First, do not enter the West Wing under any circumstances. Second, do not ask questions about the owner. Third, in the library, you may dust the shelves, the lamps, and the leather chairs, but you must not touch the old walnut writing table near the fireplace." Claire looked up from the paper. "Do not touch the table?" "Correct. Is it fragile?" "It is important." That was not an answer, but it was enough to tell her not to ask again. "Understood." Mr. Whitaker studied her face, perhaps waiting for curiosity, complaint, or greed. Claire gave him none. She needed the job more than she needed answers. He led her through the first floor, past a formal sitting room with no magazines on the tables, a music room with a grand piano that looked untouched, and a dining room long enough to make loneliness feel expensive. Everything was clean already. Too clean. A house like this did not need a night maid because it was dirty. It needed one because someone wanted proof that things stayed exactly where they belonged. At 11, Mr. Whitaker left her in the main hallway and disappeared through a side door. Claire tied the apron around her waist, rolled her shoulders once, and began. She worked quietly, wiping rain marks from the entry floor, straightening cushions no one had sat on, polishing silver frames that held no photographs. In the kitchen, she found Mrs. Nolan, the cook, trying to lift a heavy tray of tea service with trembling hands. The older woman froze when Claire stepped in. "You are not assigned to the kitchen." "I am assigned to the house," Claire said gently. "Last time I checked, the kitchen counts." Mrs. Nolan gave a tired smile despite herself. "Careful. This tray is heavier than it looks." "Most things are." Claire took one side, without waiting for permission. Together, they set it on the counter. Mrs. Nolan rubbed her fingers, embarrassed. "Arthritis. Worse when it rains." Claire filled the kettle, found a clean towel, and moved the tray closer to the warmer. "Then tonight, let the younger knees do something useful." Mrs. Nolan looked at her for a long moment. "You will not last here if you keep helping outside your list." Claire smiled faintly. "I have lasted in worse places with shorter lists." Neither woman knew that on the 3rd floor, behind a closed office door, Alexander Hayes was watching the main security feed on a muted monitor wall. The cameras showed only public rooms, hallways, entrances, and work areas, all disclosed in the employee contract, but he still hated that he felt the need to look. 36 years old, owner of Hayes Estate, founder of Hayes and Company, millionaire by every public measure, and still unable to trust one new night worker in his own house. He had reasons. Staff who sold private stories, relatives who borrowed heirlooms and never returned them, a former assistant who had treated his mother's belongings like inventory. Betrayal had not made him cruel, not exactly. It had made him observant, cold, careful. He leaned closer as Claire helped Mrs. Nolan without glancing around to see who might praise her. She moved through the mansion with quiet respect, not touching what she did not need to touch, not pocketing small things, not taking pictures of rooms worth more than most people's homes. Alexander looked away from the screen, annoyed by the small pull of interest in his chest. Kindness was easy when an audience waited. Harder at midnight, under fluorescent kitchen lights, with tired hands and no reward promised. Downstairs, Claire carried the night log toward the library. The room waited behind carved double doors, dark except for one brass lamp near the fireplace. She stepped inside and stopped. Books rose to the ceiling. Rain whispered against tall windows. And beside the fireplace stood the old walnut writing table, polished, empty, and somehow sad. Claire kept both hands at her sides. Important, she whispered, remembering the rule. Then she turned away and began dusting the shelves, unaware that somewhere above her, the owner of the mansion had stopped watching the cameras for honesty and started watching because, for the first time in years, someone in his house had made the silence feel less permanent. Claire moved through the library as if the books themselves were sleeping. The rain pressed softly against the tall windows, and the brass lamp near the fireplace painted the room in a circle of amber light. She dusted the lower shelves first, careful to lift each framed bookend and place it back exactly where she found it. The old walnut writing table stood several feet away, polished and still, its surface empty except for a faint rectangle in the dust where something must have rested for years. Claire did not touch it. She did not even step too close. In houses like this, rules were rarely about furniture. They were about grief, power, or both. Her phone vibrated in her apron pocket, and she glanced at the screen only after checking the hallway. A message from the hospital billing office appeared with a balance that made her stomach fold in on itself. Her father's latest treatment had been approved, but the remaining cost was still more than 4 months of her combined wages from the laundry, the grocery store, and now this mansion. Claire locked the phone without replying. She had learned there were some numbers you could stare at all night, and they would not become smaller out of pity. She placed the duster back in the cart, wrote library shelves completed in the night log, and moved on. The mansion seemed endless after midnight. Hallways opened into other hallways. Mirrors caught her reflection and made her look smaller than she felt. She saw her own tired face under the soft wall sconces, white skin pale from too little sleep, brown hair pinned back in a practical knot, black shoes damp at the edges from the walk up the private road. She did not look like someone who belonged near carved ceilings and silk wallpaper. She looked like someone who knew exactly how much a bus transfer cost. Still, she straightened the runner on a side table, refilled a water carafe in the guest sitting room, and replaced a dying candle on the entry console with the same care she would have given a tiny rented apartment. Work was work. If she accepted money for it, she did it properly. On the 3rd floor, Alexander watched her leave the library feed and switch to the east hallway. He should have turned the monitors off. He had already seen enough to know she was not wandering, not snooping, not looking for valuables to slip into her coat. But he stayed. The mansion had swallowed too many people and returned them changed. His cousin had taken money from the estate account for a fake investment. A former house manager had sold photographs of private rooms to a magazine. Even an old friend had borrowed a painting for a charity event and let it vanish into a storage dispute. Each betrayal had been explained afterward with soft words. Need. Pressure. Misunderstanding. Alexander no longer cared what people called it. Loss still ended up in his hands. On the screen, Claire stopped in the kitchen doorway again. Mrs. Nolan was seated at the small staff table, one hand wrapped around a mug, the other pressed lightly against her wrist. The tea tray was finished, but the older woman looked exhausted. Claire looked toward the clock, then toward her task list, then stepped inside. Alexander leaned back in his chair, waiting for the calculation he knew so well. Would she ignore it because it was not her job? Would she help only if someone saw? Instead, Claire took a clean towel from the rack, dampened it with warm water, and placed it beside Mrs. Nolan. "My father gets stiffness in his hands after treatments," she said quietly. "Warm cloth helps a little. Not a miracle, but it makes the fingers feel less angry." Mrs. Nolan gave her a grateful look that tried not to become emotional. "You talk like you know hospitals." Claire reached for the sugar bowl and set it closer. "More than I want to. Is that why you are working nights?" Claire smiled without lifting her eyes. "That, and because sleep has not figured out how to pay rent." Mrs. Nolan laughed softly, then coughed into her napkin. "You should be careful here, dear. Mr. Whitaker already gave me the rules. Rules are the polite part of this house." Claire looked at her then. "And the impolite part?" Mrs. Nolan glanced toward the ceiling. Not knowing the man she meant could see the room, but could not hear every word unless he chose to turn the audio on, which he had refused to do. This house remembers every person who took something from it. Sometimes it forgets how to welcome the ones who do not. Claire absorbed that, then nodded toward the hallway. Big houses can be like that. Can they? Yes. She picked up the empty sugar packets and folded them into the trash. Small apartments get lonely because there is not enough room. Big houses get lonely because there is too much. Mrs. Nolan studied her with a strange tenderness. "You are too young to sound that tired. I am 29. That is young only in rooms where people can afford rest." The words were not bitter. That was what caught Alexander off guard from 3 floors above. She said it like weather, like a fact learned and carried, not a complaint thrown into the room. He turned off the kitchen feed for a moment and stared at his own reflection in the dark monitor. 36 years old, surrounded by land, staff, security, and rooms nobody used, and he could not remember the last time someone had spoken in his house without protecting an angle. When he turned the feed back on, Claire was helping Mrs. Nolan label the morning tea tins in neat handwriting. She did not take a cookie from the plate beside her until Mrs. Nolan insisted twice. Even then, she broke it in half and left the larger piece on the saucer for the older woman. Alexander looked at the small act longer than he should have. At 2 in the morning, Claire returned to the main floor and found one hallway light flickering near the west wing. She stopped at the edge of the forbidden corridor, close enough to see dust gathered along the velvet rope, far enough to obey. The bulb dimmed, brightened, then dimmed again. She could have ignored it. Instead, she wrote in the night log, "West wing hallway light flickering, not entered." Then she placed a small caution stand at the edge of the public hall so nobody would trip in the shadow. On the monitor, Alexander watched the note appear in her careful handwriting. Not entered, not touched, not hidden, just noticed. He felt something loosen in his chest, something he did not trust yet. Downstairs, Claire pressed one hand briefly against her pocket, where the hospital bill weighted like a stone. She was tired enough to sit on the stairs and close her eyes, but she did not. She lifted the cleaning cart handle and kept moving through the mansion, room by room, leaving quiet order behind her. She thought no one saw. That was what made it matter. At 2:43 in the morning, Claire returned to the library for the final check, and the room seemed different than it had before, as if the rain had pressed the whole mansion deeper into itself. The brass lamp near the fireplace still burned low, making the leather chairs look old and watchful. The tall shelves rose into shadow. The forbidden walnut writing table waited near the hearth, polished and empty, except now it was not empty. Something small glinted beneath the nearest chair, half hidden by the edge of the rug. Claire stopped at the doorway. She looked once toward the hall, then back at the floor. The rule came back to her clearly. Do not touch the old walnut writing table. Mr. Whitaker had not mentioned the rug. He had not mentioned dropped objects. But rich houses turned every detail into a test, and Claire had survived too many jobs by assuming the test was always happening. She stepped closer, crouched carefully, and saw a pocket watch. It was gold, not bright in a flashy way, but warm with age, the kind of object that had passed through hands before it ever passed through money. A thin chain curled beside it like a sleeping thread. The front was engraved with small initials she could not read in the low light. Claire did not pick it up right away. Her own phone buzzed again in her pocket, and for 1 weak second, the hospital bill flashed through her mind with cruel clarity. Something like this could pay a balance. Maybe not all of it, but enough to buy time. Enough to make the billing office stop calling for a week. Enough to let her father sleep without hearing her lie that everything was handled. She closed her eyes, ashamed of the thought, even though thoughts were not actions. Then she opened them and whispered, "It is not mine." On the third floor, Alexander froze in front of the monitor. The library camera showed Claire crouched beside the chair, still as a statue, the pocket watch inches from her hand. He had not left it there as a test. That was what made his heartbeat change. The watch must have slipped from the writing table drawer when Mr. Whitaker checked the room earlier, or perhaps Alexander himself had moved it the week before and forgotten. His mother's watch. The last birthday gift she had given him before the illness took her voice. He should have locked it away. He should have kept it in the private safe. Instead, somehow, it lay on the floor in front of a night worker who needed money badly enough to walk half a mile in the rain for a shift that ended before sunrise. Alexander leaned closer, every old betrayal in his life rising like a jury. Claire reached into her apron pocket. He stiffened, but she did not hide the watch. She pulled out a clean cotton cloth from the supply cart, lifted the watch with it as gently as if it were a living thing, and placed it on the edge of the writing table, far from the inkstand, far from anything that might scratch it. Then she looked around for paper. Finding none, she tore a small blank corner from the back of an unused cleaning checklist, took out her blue pen, and wrote in careful letters. "Some things are worth more than money." She folded the note once and set it beside the watch. Only then did she step back. She did not smile. She did not look toward the camera. She did not hold the watch up for praise. She simply wrote in the night log, "Pocket watch found under library chair, placed on walnut table with cloth, not opened." Then she hesitated, because the object had clearly meant something, and a person did not leave a meaningful thing unprotected if the house was full of tired people and hidden suspicions. So she crossed to the library doors, locked them with the key card Mr. Whitaker had given her, and added another note. Library secured until morning steward review. Upstairs, Alexander stared at the screen until the images blurred. He remembered his mother sitting at that writing table when he was 12, winding the pocket watch while rain touched the glass. She had told him that a quiet house was not empty if someone inside it still cared. After she passed, he had kept the watch because it was proof that once, this mansion had held warmth. Then people came with condolences, favors, requests, and soft hands that took whatever grief left unguarded. Over the years, Alexander stopped leaving pieces of himself where others could reach them. Yet Claire Bennett had found the one thing that money could not replace and treated it as if she understood its weight without knowing its price. He reached for the audio switch, then stopped. No, he would not turn her private silence into evidence. Instead, he turned off the monitor. For the first time since he began watching the shift, the room went dark, and Alexander sat alone with the words she had written moving through him like a door opening somewhere he had sealed shut. Downstairs, Claire continued her rounds. She checked the foyer flowers, replaced a spent candle, and wrote the west hallway light into the log again because the flicker had worsened. At 4:15, she returned to the kitchen and found Mrs. Nolan asleep in a chair, her hand still curved around an empty mug. Claire did not wake her. She placed a folded towel behind the older woman's shoulder, turned the kitchen light lower, and left a note beside the kettle. "Tea is ready to warm. Please rest your hands." When the first gray hint of dawn touched the windows, Claire untied her apron and returned the key card to Mr. Whitaker at the staff entrance. He skimmed the night log, paused at the library entry, and looked at her with something close to surprise. "You found the watch." Claire rubbed her tired eyes. "Yes, sir. I did not know who it belonged to, but it looked important." "It is. Then I am glad it was not damaged." He studied her a moment longer. "You could have brought it to me. I did not want to carry it around the house. Important things should not travel more than necessary." Mr. Whitaker looked down at the note in the log, and his voice became quieter. "Some things are worth more than money." Claire gave a small, weary shrug. "Most things that matter are." Then she stepped outside into the pale morning, coat pulled tight, unaware that above the front steps, behind a third-floor window, Alexander Hayes stood watching without a monitor now, holding his mother's pocket watch in one hand and Claire's note in the other, feeling for the first time in years that trust might not be dead. It might only be very, very afraid to come home. The second night Claire arrived at Hayes' estate, the rain had stopped, but the mansion still smelled faintly of wet stone and old wood. She reached the front steps at 10:52 with a paper cup of gas station coffee in one hand and a canvas tote over her shoulder. Her father had called from the hospital before her shift, trying to sound cheerful while the machines beside his bed beeped softly in the background. He had asked if she was eating enough. She had lied and said yes. He had asked if the new night job was safe. She had looked through the bus window at the dark road leading toward the estate and lied again. Now, standing beneath the iron lamps, Claire tucked her phone away and straightened her apron before Mr. Whitaker opened the door. "Miss Bennet," he said. "Good evening." "Good evening, sir." He looked less severe than the night before, though his posture remained perfect. "Mrs. Nolan asked whether you take tea with sugar." Claire blinked. "She asked that?" "She did. Tell her I take whatever is already made." "That is not an answer she will accept." A tired smile touched Claire's mouth. "One sugar, then." Mr. Whitaker nodded as if this were important household intelligence. He handed her the key card and night log. "Your list is shorter tonight. The library remains locked for the first hour. I will open it after I inspect the writing table." Claire felt a small pinch of worry. Was something wrong with the watch? "No, because you handled it properly." The words were formal, but she heard the approval underneath. "Thank you." He turned to leave, then paused. "If you see anything unusual tonight, write it down as you did before." "Yes, sir." "And Miss Bennet?" She looked up. The owner was informed. The sentence hung in the foyer like a bell after it stopped ringing. Claire was not sure what to do with it. "About the watch. About your conduct. I was just doing the job." Mr. Whitaker studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "In this house, that has become less common than it should be." Then he walked away, leaving Claire alone beneath the chandelier. She moved through the rooms with the same quiet care as before, but now the mansion felt aware of her. Not in a frightening way, more like a house holding its breath to see whether she would return. In the sitting room, she replaced a crooked pillow. In the dining room, she wiped invisible dust from the sideboard. In the kitchen, Mrs. Nolan had left a small cup of tea near the warming tray with one sugar and a folded napkin beneath it. Claire stood there looking at it longer than she meant to. Kindness felt different when you were used to counting everything by cost. She drank half, then wrote "thank you" on the napkin and placed it by the kettle. At 12:40, Mr. Whitaker unlocked the library and told her to do a light pass only. The pocket watch was gone from the writing table. Her note was gone too. The empty space where both had been seemed softer somehow, less like a warning and more like a memory returned to its rightful place. Claire dusted the shelves, checked the lamp, and was about to leave when she noticed the hallway beyond the library door was darker than usual. A figure stood near the window at the far end. A man, tall, still, dressed in a gray sweater and dark trousers, with no shoes on the polished floor. He held something in one hand, small and gold, turning it slowly with his thumb. Claire froze, fingers tightening around the duster. The man looked up. His face was partly shadowed, but she could see he was white, about his mid-30s, with tired eyes and the kind of calm that did not come from peace. It came from practice. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "I did not mean to startle you." Claire took one careful breath. "This is a private residence, sir." "I know." That was not comforting. She glanced toward the service hall, calculating how far she was from the kitchen, from Mrs. Nolan, from a phone. The man noticed. "I am allowed to be here." Most people who are not allowed say that first. For a second, surprise crossed his face. Then, almost impossibly, he smiled. "Fair." Claire straightened. "Should I call Mr. Whitaker?" "No need. He knows I am in the house." "Are you family?" The man looked down at the object in his hand. "The pocket watch." "Something like that." Claire's eyes moved to it before she could stop herself. "That belongs to the owner." "Yes." "Then you should probably put it somewhere safer than a dark hallway." The smile faded, but not in anger. More like she had touched the exact place the watch lived inside him. "You are the one who found it. I am the one who almost stepped on it. You left a note." It seemed rude to leave a valuable thing without an explanation. "You called it worth more than money." Claire shifted the duster from one hand to the other. "Was I wrong?" He looked at the watch again. "No." The quiet between them deepened. Rainwater still clung to the trees outside, and the moon turned the window glass pale. The house around them felt enormous, yet in that hallway, under low light, the man in the gray sweater looked less like danger and more like loneliness wearing good posture. Claire relaxed by 1 inch, no more. Do you need something, sir? No. Then why are you standing in the hallway at 1 in the morning holding a watch like it might answer you? The question slipped out before she could pull it back. She immediately winced. I am sorry. That was too direct. To her surprise, he did not seem offended. It belonged to my mother. Claire's expression softened. Then I am sorry again, but for a different reason. He looked at her closely, not like a rich man examining staff, but like a person hearing sincerity and not knowing where to put it. You did not open it. It was not mine to open. Many people would have. Many people are not my responsibility. He absorbed that, then gave a small nod. Claire glanced toward the kitchen. Mrs. Nolan made tea. There is probably enough left if you want some. You are offering me tea in a house where you work? I am offering a person standing barefoot in a dark hallway something warm. The house is just where it is happening. Something shifted in his face again, a crack in the careful stillness. You do that often? Offer tea. See people. Claire thought of her father in the hospital, Mrs. Nolan's aching hands, the portraits turned toward the wall, and this stranger holding grief like an heirloom. Only when they are right in front of me. In the kitchen, she poured tea into a white cup and set it on the staff table. He sat across from her, still holding the watch, though now his hand rested open around it. I do not know your name, she said. He hesitated just long enough for her to notice. Alexander. She nodded. Claire. I know. Her brows lifted. Of course you do. Everyone knows the night maid's name before she knows theirs. He looked ashamed before he could hide it. That came out wrong. Most honest things do. She pushed the tea closer. He took it with a quiet thank you. For a while, neither of them spoke. The kitchen clock ticked. The mansion settled around them. Finally, Alexander looked toward the dark hall and said, Big houses become louder at night. Claire wrapped both hands around her own cup. Only when they are lonely. He looked at her then, and the guarded man inside the gray sweater seemed to forget one wall. Claire did not ask who he really was. He did not tell her. But when she returned to her work a few minutes later, the light above the kitchen table stayed on, and Alexander remained there with the tea cooling in his hands, as if someone had left a small lamp burning in a place he thought had gone dark forever. By the fourth night, Claire no longer flinched when the mansion settled around her after midnight. She knew which floorboard near the east sitting room made a soft complaint, which hallway lamp needed a moment before it brightened, and which kettle in the kitchen sang too loudly if the water filled past the little dent near the handle. She also knew Alexander would appear sometime after 1 in the morning, always in the same gray sweater, always barefoot or in quiet socks, always pretending he had wandered into the kitchen by accident. Claire had started calling him Mr. Gray in her own mind before the name slipped out loud. He did not correct her. Maybe he liked being someone simple for an hour. Maybe she liked speaking to someone in that house who did not treat every sentence like a rule. That night, he found her in the library, writing carefully in the log while the rain tapped lightly against the glass. A plain white envelope sat on the small side table near the leather chair, thick enough to be noticed, unsealed enough to be tempting. Claire had seen it the moment she walked in. She had dusted around it, checked the floor beneath it, and looked once toward the ceiling corner where the security camera watched the public room with its tiny red light. Then she opened the night log and wrote, Unsealed cash envelope found on side table in library, not counted, placed in locked drawer for steward review. Alexander stood in the doorway, watching her slide the envelope into the drawer beneath the reading desk and lock it with the library key. You did not count it, he said. Claire turned, startled only for a second. Good evening, Mr. Gray. You did not answer. No, I did not count it. Why not? She looked at him as if the question itself was strange. Because counting money that is not mine still feels like touching it. What if someone asks how much was inside? Then they should have sealed it, labeled it, or handed it to the person responsible. I am here to clean rooms, not audit mysteries. His mouth softened. You make honesty sound practical. It is practical. Lies take maintenance. I am tired. The answer landed with him in a way she did not understand. He stepped inside but kept distance from the writing table, as if respecting the same rules she did. If no one had seen it, would that change anything? Claire closed the log. If it is not mine, it does not become mine just because nobody sees me touch it. Alexander looked away toward the fireplace, and she thought she saw something like pain pass through him. Not sadness exactly. Recognition. That seems simple to you. It is simple. Hard sometimes, but simple. Before he could answer, a sharp clatter rang from the dining room. Claire moved first, quick but calm, and Alexander followed several steps behind. In the dining room, a young footman named Peter stood frozen beside the service cart. A porcelain teacup lay in pieces on the floor near the rug, tea spreading in a pale amber line across the polished wood. Margaret Sloane, the former house manager who still came twice a week to oversee inventory, stood near the doorway with her arms crossed. She was a white woman in her 50s, perfectly dressed, with a face that looked polite only from far away. "Careless," Margaret said. "This set is older than your job." Peter went red. "I am sorry. The cart will caught on the rug." The cart did not move itself. Claire saw his hands shaking, saw the chipped cup, saw Margaret's satisfaction as if one broken thing had proved a whole person useless. She also saw what Peter was too frightened to say. The rug corner had been turned up earlier when Claire passed through, and she had meant to smooth it after bringing fresh linens from the hall. "It was my fault," Claire said. Peter turned to her. "No, it was not. I noticed the rug and did not fix it right away," Claire continued, kneeling to gather the larger pieces with a dustpan. He could not see it from behind the cart. Margaret lifted one thin eyebrow. "How noble." Claire looked up. "Not noble. Accurate. And are you authorized to take responsibility for antique breakage?" "I am authorized to tell the truth." The room went quiet. Alexander remained in the shadow beyond the doorway, unseen by Margaret, but Claire felt his presence there, still and focused. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "You are very confident for someone new." Claire kept her voice even. "No, ma'am. I am just not comfortable letting someone else be blamed for something I could have prevented." Peter whispered, "Thank you," but Claire only shook her head slightly, telling him not to make it bigger. She cleaned the tea, placed the broken porcelain on a folded towel, and wrote the incident in the night log exactly as it happened. No drama, no excuses, no attempt to make herself look better. Later, in the kitchen, Alexander stood beside the table while Claire washed her hands. "You could be charged for that cup," he said. "Probably. It may be worth more than a week of your wages. Then I will have a bad week." "Why protect him?" Claire dried her hands slowly. "I did not protect him. I told the truth. You took the risk." "Because he looked like he had spent his whole life being blamed quickly." Alexander looked down at the pocket watch in his hand, turning it once with his thumb. "And you?" Claire gave a small tired smile. "I learned to become useful before anyone decided I was disposable." The words emptied the room of air. Alexander wanted to say something, but nothing polished would survive what she had just given him. So he only pulled out a chair. "Tea?" he asked. Claire blinked, surprised. "You are offering?" "Badly, probably." She studied him for a moment. "Then Saturday, 1 sugar." He poured with careful concentration, spilling only a little, and Claire did not laugh until he did. For the first time, the sound reached the dark corners of the kitchen and stayed there. Upstairs, the monitors were off. Downstairs, beside old cabinets and cooling tea, Alexander Hayes stopped testing Claire Bennett for honesty and began wondering what kind of man he would need to become before she could ever trust him with the truth. By the 7th night, Claire had stopped checking the clock every 10 minutes. The mansion still felt too large for one life, but it no longer felt empty in the same way. Mrs. Nolan left tea with 1 sugar beside the kettle. Peter began smoothing every rug corner twice before moving a cart. Mr. Whitaker nodded to Claire with quiet respect when she arrived, and Alexander, still pretending to be only the restless man in the gray sweater, appeared after midnight with the pocket watch in his hand and questions he tried to make sound casual. Claire knew he was not ordinary. No one in that house moved around him like he was ordinary, even when they pretended not to notice him. But she let the mystery stay where it was because some truths needed permission before they stepped into the light. That night, she found him in the library, standing near the walnut writing table with the old watch open in his palm. The lamp turned the gold case warm. Rain had not returned, but wind moved through the trees outside, brushing branches against the glass like soft fingertips. "You keep carrying that," Claire said from the doorway. Alexander looked up. "You keep noticing things. That is half my job, and the other half, pretending I do not notice things people want hidden." He closed the watch slowly. "That sounds lonely." Claire pushed the cleaning cart inside and gave the shells a quick look. Not as lonely as hiding them. He accepted that in silence. She dusted the lower table beside the armchair, carefully avoiding the walnut writing table as always. A week ago, she had felt like a visitor in someone else's grief. Now the room felt less like a locked memory and more like a place waiting to be used again. "Your mother?" she asked, nodding toward the watch. Alexander's fingers tightened slightly around it. "Yes. She must have loved you very much." He looked at her with a guarded sadness. "How can you tell?" "The inscription." His eyes sharpened. "You said you did not open it." "I did not." Mr. Whitaker mentioned there was an inscription after he inspected it. Claire paused, then added, "He did not tell me what it said. But people do not engrave pocket watches for sons they barely think about." Alexander looked down, and for a moment the millionaire hidden beneath the gray sweater disappeared completely. He was only a man standing in a quiet room, holding proof that someone once knew how to comfort him. She wrote, "To my son, when the house feels too quiet." Claire's face softened. "That is beautiful. It used to be. It still is." "You say that as if beauty survives being mishandled." Claire leaned the duster against her cart. "Sometimes it does. Sometimes it changes shape." He looked at her then, really looked, and Claire felt the air between them become too honest to hide inside small talk. "Your father," he said carefully. "Is he very ill?" Claire's hand moved to her apron pocket where her phone and the newest hospital bill rested. She almost gave her usual answer. "Stable. Managing. Fine." The words poor people used when the truth was too expensive to explain. But Alexander had not asked like someone collecting information. He asked like someone willing to sit with an answer. "He is better than he was," she said. "But better still costs money. And you are paying alone." It was not a question. Claire smiled without humor. "Bills do not care whether you are alone. They arrive either way." "Do you have family helping?" "My mother passed when I was 20. My father raised me after that. Now it is my turn." "That is a heavy turn." "Most love is heavy when it matters." Alexander looked away first. The sentence seemed to travel somewhere deep inside him. Later, in the kitchen, they drank tea with leftover shortbread Mrs. Nolan had hidden beneath a cloth. Alexander asked what Claire wanted before life became shifts, bills, and hospital elevators. She almost laughed. "You ask big questions for a man who has not told me why he lives in hallways after midnight." "Fair. I wanted to become a nurse once," she said. "Not because I am noble. Because after sitting beside my mother in hospitals, I realized how much a calm voice can change a room." "Why did you stop?" "Tuition. Rent. Life." She broke a cookie in half. "Dreams do not always end dramatically. Sometimes they just get postponed until they stop making noise." Alexander was quiet for a long time. "That should not happen. It happens every day. It should not happen to you." Claire looked at him across the staff table. "Careful, Mr. Gray." That sounded almost personal. His mouth softened. Maybe it was. The kitchen seemed warmer then, and more dangerous for reasons that had nothing to do with locked wings or hidden cameras. Claire looked away, focusing on her tea. "Trust is a slow thing," she said. "People talk about earning it like there is one grand moment. But that is not how it works." "How does it work?" "In teaspoons." Alexander blinked. "Teaspoons. Small amounts. Repeated. Easy to spill. Hard to collect again once they hit the floor." He looked at the cup between his hands, then at her. "And if someone has spilled too much?" Claire stood, carrying her empty cup to the sink. "Then they stop asking for a full cup and start proving they can hold 1 teaspoon without dropping it." She rinsed the cup and placed it on the rack. When she turned back, Alexander was watching her with an expression she could not name, something between gratitude and fear. "Claire," he said. She waited. He seemed ready to tell her something. His real place in the house, maybe. His name beyond the one he had given. The truth she had not demanded. But footsteps sounded in the hall before he could speak, and Mr. Whitaker appeared at the doorway, posture stiff, eyes moving quickly from Claire to Alexander. "Sir," he said, then stopped. The word landed hard. Not Mr. Gray. Not Alexander as a guest. "Sir." Claire felt the shift before anyone explained it. Alexander's face tightened, regret already there. Mr. Whitaker recovered too late. "Forgive me. I did not realize Miss Bennet was still in the kitchen." Claire looked from one man to the other, the pieces rearranging themselves in the quiet. The staff's careful glances. The watch. The authority in his silences. The way he knew her name before she knew his. She set the towel down slowly. "I think my shift list just got longer," she said, voice calm but wounded. Alexander took one step toward her. "Claire, I was going to tell you." She nodded, not trusting herself to answer fully. In teaspoons, right? Then she picked up the night log and walked back into the hall, leaving him beside the tea, the old watch, and the truth he had waited too long to give. Claire almost did not return for the 8th night. She stood outside the staff entrance at 10:58, one hand on the cold brass handle, the other wrapped around the strap of her canvas tote, and listened to the wind move through the trees beyond the estate. The hospital bill was still in her pocket. Her father had sounded weaker on the phone that afternoon, though he tried to hide it by asking whether she had eaten dinner. The laundry shift had run long. Her feet ached, and every sensible part of her wanted to turn around, walk back down the private road, and leave Hayes' estate to its rules, shadows, and half-truths. But pride did not refill prescriptions. Hurt feelings did not pay rent. So Claire opened the door and stepped inside. Mr. Whitaker was waiting in the service hall, his expression more troubled than usual. "Miss Bennet." "Mr. Whitaker." Her voice was polite, but cooler now. He noticed. "About last night. I am here to work." He nodded slowly, accepting the boundary. "Of course." He handed her the key card and the log. "The owner has requested that you remain on regular duties." Claire looked at him. "The owner can request whatever he likes. I will follow the written task list." The words were not loud, but they had edges. Mr. Whitaker lowered his eyes. "Understood." She moved through the mansion with a steadiness that cost more than anyone saw. She did not look toward the third-floor landing. She did not pause near the kitchen table where she and Alexander had shared tea. She did not wonder whether he was watching the public security monitors again, because wondering gave him space in her mind, and she needed that space for survival. Near midnight, Margaret Sloane arrived in a dark wool coat, carrying an inventory folder and wearing the kind of smile that made kindness feel like a trap. "Still here, Miss Bennet?" she asked from the dining room doorway. Claire continued polishing the sideboard. "My shift ends at 5. How admirable." Some girls would have become uncomfortable after learning they had attracted the owner's attention. Claire set the cloth down. "I am here to earn a paycheck, not attention." Margaret stepped closer, her perfume sharp in the quiet room. "Everyone says that at first." Claire met her eyes. "Then I will keep saying it until it remains true." Margaret's smile thinned. "Be careful. This house has a way of revealing what people really are. Then it should start with people who have worked here the longest." For one brief second, Margaret's expression hardened. Then she laughed softly and walked away. Claire should have written the exchange in the log. She almost did. But the night was long, the silver needed checking, and she was tired of making every insult official. At 2:15, she went to the cloakroom near the front hall to retrieve her coat for the quick walk to the staff storage shed. She needed more linen cloths. Her coat hung where she had left it. Nothing looked different. She put it on, reached into the pocket for her gloves, and felt something cool and round against her fingers. Claire froze. Slowly, she pulled it out. A pearl necklace lay across her palm, cream-colored and heavy, with a diamond clasp that glittered under the low light. For one breath, the mansion seemed to disappear. Then Margaret's voice rang from the hall. "Security." Footsteps approached at once. 2 guards entered, followed by Mr. Whitaker, Mrs. Nolan, Peter, and Margaret, whose face wore perfect concern. "I saw her near the display cabinet earlier," Margaret said. "I hoped I was wrong." Claire looked at the necklace in her hand, then at the small crowd forming around her. Heat rose in her face, not from guilt, but from the old humiliation of being suspected quickly. The kind that came when you paid with exact change, and someone washed your pockets anyway. One guard held out his hand. "Miss Bennet, please place the necklace on the table." Claire did as asked, gently, because even in that moment it was not hers to handle carelessly. Mr. Whitaker looked shaken. "Claire." Hearing her first name in his worried voice hurt more than she expected. Margaret sighed. Desperation can make honest people do unfortunate things. Claire lifted her head. Her voice came out calm, though her heart was beating hard. "I have been poor my whole life. That never made me a thief." The hall went silent. Mrs. Nolan pressed one hand to her mouth. Peter stepped forward. She would not do this. Margaret turned on him. "You know that after 1 week?" Claire kept her eyes on Mr. Whitaker. "Check the cameras." "The cloakroom camera has been down since this morning," Margaret said quickly. Too quickly, Claire noticed. So did someone else. From the staircase above, a man's voice cut through the hall, quiet but carrying enough authority to make every person turn. "That is interesting, Margaret." Alexander stood on the landing, No gray sweater tonight, but a dark suit, open collar, and the pocket watch chain visible against his vest. He descended slowly, his eyes not leaving Margaret. Claire felt the last piece fall into place, even though part of her had already known. The restless man in the kitchen was not a guest, not family, not a lonely shadow passing through another man's home. He was Alexander Hayes, the owner, the millionaire, the one who had watched before he trusted. Margaret went pale, then recovered. "Mr. Hayes, I was just handling an unfortunate staff matter." Alexander reached the bottom step. "No, you were staging one." The words landed like a door closing. Claire should have felt relieved. Instead, the hurt sharpened. He was standing there ready to save her, but he had also been close enough to let the test exist in the first place. Alexander looked at her, and the apology in his eyes came too late to stop the ache. "Claire." She said nothing. Margaret lifted her chin. "Surely you do not intend to take the word of a night made over mine." Alexander's face hardened, not with anger, but with decision. "I intend to take the truth over anyone's position." He turned to Mr. Whitaker. "Bring the full security archive, not just the cloakroom, the hall, the inventory room, and the service corridor." Margaret's fingers tightened around her folder. Claire saw it then. Fear, not of being misunderstood, of being found out. The guard stepped aside. No one touched Claire. No one apologized yet. She looked at the pearl necklace on the table, then at Alexander. "You can prove I did not take it." "Yes," he said. "Then prove it because it is true, not because you feel guilty." His jaw tightened. "I will." Claire held his gaze for one long second. "Good." And in the grand hallway of Hayes' estate, beneath portraits that had seen too many secrets, the poor night worker stood straighter than everyone who had doubted her, waiting for the rich man who had hidden in shadows to finally step fully into the light. Alexander did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The moment he stepped into the grand hallway, the mansion changed around him. Guards straightened. Peter stopped trembling. Mrs. Nolan lowered her hand from her mouth. Mr. Whitaker stood beside the console table with the night log pressed against his chest, looking like a man who had just realized how close the house had come to repeating its oldest mistake. Claire remained near the cloakroom door, her coat still open, her hands empty, the pearl necklace resting on the table between her and Margaret Sloane like a beautiful lie waiting to be named. Alexander looked at the necklace, then at Claire. "You were asked to place it down?" "Yes." "Were you searched?" "No." His eyes moved to the guards. "Good. Nobody touches her belongings without clear reason and her consent." The words were calm, but every person heard the correction underneath. Claire felt something loosen in her chest, not forgiveness, not trust, but the first small relief of being treated like a person before being treated like a problem. Margaret gave a thin laugh. "This is becoming theatrical, Mr. Hayes." The necklace was found in her pocket. "Surely that is reason enough." Alexander turned to her. "It was found because you told security where to look." Margaret's smile held, but barely. "Because I saw suspicious behavior." "Then we will review what you saw." Mr. Whitaker returned with a slim tablet connected to the estate security archive. Alexander set it on the console table and turned the screen so everyone could see. "The cloakroom camera is down, as you said, but the hallway camera outside the cloakroom is not. Neither is the service corridor camera. Neither is the inventory room camera." Margaret went still. Claire watched her face, and for the first time that night, the woman's polished confidence showed a crack. Alexander tapped the screen. The first video showed the display cabinet at 12:07. Margaret stood alone before it, checking the hallway before opening the glass door with her own key. She removed the pearl necklace, slipped it inside a folded linen cloth, and walked away. No sound played, only the silent honesty of movement. Peter whispered, "Oh my." Mrs. Nolan closed her eyes. Margaret's voice sharpened. "That proves nothing. I manage inventory." Alexander did not answer. He tapped again. The next camera angle showed Margaret entering the staff corridor at 12:19. She paused outside the cloakroom, glanced behind her, then stepped inside with the folded linen cloth in her hand. When she came out, the cloth was flat and empty. Claire felt the blood drain from her face, not from surprise, but from the heavy understanding of how easily a life could be stained if the right person told the wrong story first. Alexander lifted his eyes to Margaret. "Would you like to explain that as inventory management?" Margaret's mouth opened, then closed. The hallway seemed to hold its breath. "I was testing her," Margaret said finally. For your protection. You have been careless lately, allowing sentiment to cloud judgment. Someone had to be sure. Claire gave a small, disbelieving breath. Alexander's face hardened. You do not get to damage a person's name and call it protection. She is a temporary worker. She is an employee in my house. A night maid. A woman, Alexander said, each word clear, who deserved the truth before suspicion. The sentence settled deep in the hall. Claire looked at him then, and something in his expression told her he was not only speaking to Margaret. He was speaking to himself. Mr. Whitaker stepped forward, voice low. Mr. Hayes, shall I contact the estate attorney? Yes. Begin a full review of Margaret's inventory access for the past 3 years. Effective immediately, she is relieved of all responsibilities at Hayes Estate and Hayes and Company. Properties. Margaret's composure finally broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the small way pride collapses when it realizes the room no longer belongs to it. After everything I have done for this family? Alexander looked at the pocket watch chain near his vest, then back at her. That is exactly what we are going to review. The guards escorted Margaret to the side office to collect her things under supervision. No one cheered. That mattered to Claire. This was not a victory with applause. It was a correction long overdue. Peter turned to her first. Claire, I am sorry. I should have said more. She shook her head gently. You said enough. Mrs. Nolan came next, taking Claire's hands in both of hers. Dear girl, I knew it was not you. Claire smiled, but it hurt. Knowing quietly does not always save someone. Mrs. Nolan's eyes filled. No, it does not. Alexander heard that and flinched slightly. Then he turned to the staff. I owe Miss Bennet an apology in front of the same people who witnessed the accusation. Claire stiffened. You do not have to perform. No, he said, looking at her. I have performed enough by hiding. He faced the hall, the guards, the staff, Mr. Whitaker, everyone who had stood around her while the necklace lay on the table. Miss Bennet found my mother's pocket watch on her first night. She protected it. She found an unsealed cash envelope and secured it properly. She defended a young employee when blame came too easily. Tonight, when she was falsely accused, she remained more dignified than the people who doubted her. She had every chance to take what was mine. Instead, she protected what money could never replace. Claire looked away because the words were too much and not enough at the same time. They cleared her name, but they did not erase the fact that he had known her through tests before knowing her through truth. When the hall emptied, only the two of them remained near the console table. The pearl necklace had been returned to its case. The night log lay open. Alexander stood several feet away, careful now, as if distance were the first apology he understood how to offer. Claire, he said, I am sorry. She turned to him slowly. For Margaret? For all of it. You watched me prove myself before you trusted me. His face tightened. Yes. That is not the same as knowing me. No, he said quietly. It is not. The honesty hurt less than an excuse would have. Claire picked up her canvas tote from the bench. I am glad you told the truth tonight. But I should not have needed a millionaire to walk down the stairs before people believed I was honest. Alexander lowered his eyes. The pocket watch chain caught the light, small and gold against the dark fabric. You are right. She almost smiled at the familiar answer, but she was too tired. Then learn what being right costs someone who cannot afford to be doubted. She walked toward the staff exit, and this time no one stopped her. Behind her, Alexander stood in the grand hallway of his own mansion, surrounded by marble, portraits, and wealth, understanding that clearing her name was only the first teaspoon of trust he owed. Claire did not return to Hayes Estate the next night, or the night after that. For the first time in weeks, the mansion stayed fully staffed and still felt unfinished. Mrs. Nolan left one cup beside the kettle out of habit, then poured it away before dawn. Peter checked every rug corner twice and looked toward the staff entrance whenever the clock neared 11. Mr. Whitaker kept the night log open longer than necessary, as if careful handwriting might appear by will alone. Alexander noticed all of it because absence had a sound, and Claire's absence moved through the house louder than any storm. He did not call her. He wanted to. He had her emergency contact information, her address from payroll, her father's hospital listed in the benefits paperwork. For years, when Alexander wanted something handled, he reached for a phone and the world rearranged itself. This time, he forced his hand to stay still. Trust did not come back by command. It came back in teaspoons. On the third morning, he went to the hospital alone, not to Claire's father's room, not with flowers, not with a check large enough to make gratitude unavoidable. He went to the administrative office and asked about creating a fund for night shift workers and their families, a fund with independent oversight, anonymous application review, and no requirement that recipients know his name. The hospital director assumed it was a tax decision. Alexander let her. Then he added one condition. A worker advisory board would help design it, and if Claire Bennett ever agreed, she would be paid to lead that board. Paid for her expertise, he said, when the director suggested calling it volunteer service. Not praised while being unpaid. That afternoon, he returned to Hayes Estate and opened the West Wing for the first time in years. Not all at once. One room, one curtain, one locked cabinet. His mother's things had been preserved so carefully they had stopped feeling loved. Alexander stood in the old sitting room with the pocket watch in his hand and Claire's note beside it. Some things are worth more than money. He finally understood that worth did not mean keeping something untouched forever. Sometimes worth meant letting light reach it again. A week passed before Claire returned to the estate, not for a shift, but because Mr. Whitaker called and said her final paycheck and incident report were ready for review. She arrived at 4 in the afternoon, in jeans, a cream sweater, and the same gray coat from the first night. Daylight changed the mansion. The marble looked less severe. The portraits on the staircase had been turned forward again. Fresh flowers stood in the foyer, simple white tulips, not expensive arrangements trying to impress anyone. Claire noticed them, then noticed Alexander waiting near the library doors. He did not step toward her. "Miss Bennett," he said. The formality almost made her smile. "Mr. Hayes, thank you for coming." Mr. Whitaker said paperwork. "There is paperwork." His voice stayed steady, but his eyes did not. "And an apology, if you are willing to hear one. Not instead of paperwork." That mattered. She hated that it mattered. "I can hear it." He nodded once. "I am sorry for hiding who I was. I am sorry for watching you as a test before I treated you as a person. The security cameras in public areas were disclosed, but my motive was not. I used honesty as something you had to prove while I kept mine protected. That was wrong." Claire held her coat closed, more from habit than cold. "Yes. I have no defense." "Good. Defenses are heavy." A small breath left him. Not quite a laugh. "I am learning." That word again. "This time I brought evidence." He gestured toward the library, but did not move first. Claire stepped inside. The walnut writing table was no longer empty. On it lay the pocket watch, polished gently, beside a folder and a small white card. The lamp was on, even though the sun had not set. Claire looked at the light, then at him. He remembered. Lonely people do not always need questions. Sometimes they just need someone to leave the light on. Alexander stood by the doorway. The folder explains a new employee support program for night shift workers across Hayes and company properties. Medical hardship grants. Legal aid. Safe reporting channels for staff accused without evidence. Paid advisory leadership. The offer to help lead it is inside, with salary, authority, and the right to refuse any part of it. Claire looked at the folder but did not touch it yet. "Is this charity?" "No, is this guilt?" "It started there," he admitted. "Then I asked what would still matter if you never forgave me. This did." The answer was imperfect enough to be believable. Claire opened the folder and read the first page. Her name was there, but not as a beneficiary. As a consultant. A leader. Someone with knowledge worth paying for. Her throat tightened. "My father's bills." Alexander's hands remained at his sides. "The fund can review his case the same way it reviews everyone else's. You do not owe me access to your life for him to receive help." She looked up. "You understand why that matters?" "I am beginning to." Silence settled between them, no longer empty, just careful. Months later, Claire did take the position. Not quickly, not softly. She negotiated every term, added protections for temporary workers, insisted that accusation procedures require evidence before humiliation, and made Alexander sit through 3 listening sessions without speaking unless asked. He did. Mrs. Nolan called it the best miracle the estate had seen since central heating. Peter became the first employee representative from household staff. The West Wing became a training space instead of a museum of old suspicion. And every Thursday night, after the last meeting ended, Claire found the library lamp left on. Not to summon her, not to test her, just on. One evening in late autumn, She entered the library after a long hospital visit with her father, who was finally improving enough to complain about bland soup. On the walnut table sat the pocket watch and a new note in Alexander's careful handwriting. Trust came back in teaspoons. You were the first one. Claire picked up the note and stood very still. Alexander appeared at the doorway, not hiding now, not pretending to be Mr. Gray. Too much? He asked quietly. Claire looked at the lamp, the watch, the room that no longer felt forbidden, and the man who had stopped asking to be trusted and started becoming trustworthy. No, she said. 1 teaspoon. He smiled then, small and real. She walked to the table, took the pen beside the note, and wrote beneath his words, "Then keep the light on." Alexander read it, and something gentle opened in his face. Outside, the estate windows reflected the first stars over Connecticut. Inside, the mansion was still large, still old, still full of memories, but it no longer felt like a house waiting to catch someone failing. It felt like a place learning to welcome people who had already proven enough simply by being human. And for Claire Bennett, who had entered that mansion needing only a paycheck, the greatest surprise was not that the owner had been a millionaire. It was that love could begin in the quietest way possible, with a cup of tea, a kept promise, and a light left on by someone finally worthy of being seen.